Sarah Martinez had always found peace in the rhythmic precision of target shooting. The outdoor range in rural Montana stretched before her like a sanctuary, mountains rising in the distance while the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the shooting lanes. At 42, she had traded her combat boots for hiking shoes, her military-issue rifle for a custom hunting piece, and her classified missions for a quiet life running a small bookstore in town. The brass casings clinked against the concrete as they fell from her rifle. Each shot was deliberate, measured, a meditation that helped quiet the memories that sometimes surfaced without warning. Sarah had been out of the game for 8 years now, ever since she'd requested discharge from the Special Operations Command after her final mission in Eastern Europe. The official records listed her as a decorated intelligence officer, but the reality was far more complex. She adjusted her scope and fired another round, watching through her binoculars as it struck dead center. Her muscle memory hadn't faded, even after all these years of civilian life. The fundamentals were still there: breathing control, trigger discipline, reading wind patterns. Skills that had once kept her alive in places most people couldn't pronounce, now reduced to weekend hobby shooting at paper targets. The range was nearly empty on this Tuesday afternoon. Most people were at work, living their normal lives, worrying about normal things like mortgage payments and their kids' soccer games. Sarah envied them sometimes. The simplicity of a life where the biggest concern was whether to order pizza or cook dinner. She tried to build that life for herself, but some stains never quite wash clean. Her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket, but she ignored it. Tuesday afternoons were sacred time, just her and the targets and the steady rhythm that helped keep the darker thoughts at bay. She'd learned to manage the nightmares, the sudden startle responses, the way her hand instinctively moved toward a weapon that wasn't there when someone approached too quietly. The range helped with all of that. Another shot, another perfect hit. Sarah lowered her rifle and checked her watch. She'd been here for 2 hours, burning through ammunition with the precision of someone who'd once made every bullet count in life-or-death situations. The afternoon was cooling off, and she should probably head home soon. Mrs. Henderson was covering the bookstore, but Sarah didn't like leaving her alone for too long. The phone buzzed again. Then, again. Sarah sighed and set her rifle on the bench, pulling out the device. Unknown number, but something about the pattern of calls made her pause. 3 calls in rapid succession wasn't random. It was a signal. She almost dismissed it. Almost. But 8 years of paranoia and training were hard to shake. Sarah answered on the 4th ring. Hello? Silence. Then, a series of electronic tones, high and low in a pattern she recognized but hadn't heard in nearly a decade. Her blood went cold. The phone's screen flickered, displaying symbols that weren't part of any normal communication system. Government encryption, high-level clearance required. This isn't possible, she whispered to herself, but her hands were already moving with practiced efficiency, packing her rifle case with the speed of someone who'd done it 1,000 times under pressure. The screen cleared, showing a single line of text: Widow Mark 27 reactivation protocol initiated. Secure location required for briefing. Sarah stared at the words, her heart hammering against her ribs. Widow Mark 27. That was her old designation, a call sign she'd hoped never to hear again. The program had been classified beyond black, so secret that most of the intelligence community didn't know it existed. She'd been told it was permanently discontinued when she left. They'd promised her it was over. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed back, protocol no longer valid. Agent discharged 2017. The response came immediately: emergency reactivation authorized by National Security Directive 847. Time critical. Coordinates uploading. Sarah's training kicked in even as her mind reeled. She scanned the area automatically, noting exit routes, potential cover, anyone who might be watching. The range was still mostly empty, just an elderly man at the far end working with a pistol, and a young couple setting up at the rifle lane 2 spots over. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that a ghost from the shadow world had just been pulled back from the dead. The coordinates appeared on her screen. A location about 30 miles north, deep in the national forest. She knew the area, remote, no cell coverage, perfect for a clandestine meeting. Part of her wanted to delete the message, drive home, and pretend this had never happened. She'd built a good life here. Small but peaceful. Safe. But the other part of her, the part that had earned the widow designation through missions that officially never happened, knew that when they reactivated a burned asset, it meant something catastrophic was happening. The kind of catastrophic that meant her quiet bookstore life might not survive regardless of what she chose to do. Sarah finished packing her gear and loaded everything into her truck. The elderly man at the other end of the range waved goodbye, and she managed to wave back, her face a mask of calm despite the storm building inside her chest. 8 years. 8 years of therapy, of building something normal, of trying to forget the things she'd done in the name of national security. As she drove toward the coordinates, Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. The Widow program had been designed for the most sensitive operations, the kind where plausible deniability wasn't enough, where the government needed complete separation from any official channels. Widows were assets that could be disavowed without a trace, their existence scrubbed from all records if things went wrong. The road wound through increasingly dense forest, taking her farther from civilization with each mile. Sarah checked her mirrors constantly, old habits reasserting themselves. No surveillance that she could detect, but that didn't mean much. Technology had advanced considerably since her active days. She pulled into a small clearing marked by 2 fallen logs arranged in an X pattern, the signal that she was in the right place. The silence of the deep woods pressed against her eardrums, broken only by the ticking of her truck's cooling engine. Sarah sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, considering her options one final time. She could leave. Drive back to town, close up the bookstore, disappear. She had money saved, false identities cached in various locations from her active years. The skills to vanish completely. But running meant never knowing what threat had been serious enough to resurrect a program that was supposed to be buried deeper than nuclear waste. Movement in her peripheral vision made her turn. A figure emerged from behind a cluster of pine trees, walking with the measured pace of someone accustomed to being in control. Military bearing, expensive but practical clothing, the kind of neutral expression that came from years of delivering news that no one wanted to hear. Sarah recognized the type if not the specific individual. Government handler, probably CIA or NSA, possibly something even more classified. She'd worked with dozens of them over the years, and they all had the same look, like they'd seen too much but were professionally required to act like everything was manageable. She stepped out of her truck, her hand automatically checking the position of the concealed pistol she always carried. Some habits were too ingrained to break, even after 8 years of civilian life. Sarah Martinez, the man said as he approached. Not a question. That's not my name, she replied automatically. It was true, Sarah Martinez was just one of several identities she'd used over the years. Her real name was buried so deep in classified files that sometimes she forgot it herself. Today it is. He stopped about 10 feet away, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough to speak without raising his voice. I'm Agent Collins. Thank you for responding to the activation signal. I didn't have much choice. When that particular phone starts ringing, people tend to answer. Collins nodded. The protocol exists for situations where choice becomes a luxury we can't afford. I'm sorry to pull you back into this world, but circumstances have developed that require your specific skill set. Sarah felt the familiar weight settling on her shoulders, the burden of being needed for things that couldn't be solved through normal channels. I was told the Widow program was permanently discontinued. Congressional oversight, too much exposure risk, all that. It was. Officially, it never existed. But the infrastructure remained dormant, just in case. Collins pulled a tablet from his jacket and handed it to her. We need you to read this before we proceed. Security clearance has been temporarily reinstated. The tablet screen showed a series of classified documents, marked with clearance levels she'd hoped never to see again. Sarah scrolled through them, her expression growing darker with each page. Names she recognized, places she'd been, operations she'd thought were ancient history. This can't be right, she said finally. I'm afraid it is. Someone is systematically targeting former widow operatives. 3 are confirmed dead in the last 2 weeks, made to look like accidents or random crimes. We have reason to believe you're on the list. The words hit her like a physical blow. Sarah thought of her quiet bookstore, her regular customers, Mrs. Henderson who helped out part-time and always asked about her garden. The life she'd built, careful and deliberate, brick by brick. Who, she asked. That's what we need you to help us find out. But, first, we need to get you somewhere safe. Your current identity is compromised. Sarah looked around the peaceful forest clearing, at the mountains rising in the distance, at the ordinary Tuesday afternoon that had just become anything but ordinary. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she'd always known this day might come. You didn't just walk away from the shadow world. It had a way of following you home. How long do I have to decide? Collins checked his watch. There's a team en route to your bookstore right now. They should be in position within the hour. We can extract you safely, but we need to move. The casual mention of her bookstore, her sanctuary, her attempt at normalcy, being under surveillance sent a chill through her. These people had been watching her, probably for years. Waiting to see if they'd ever need to pull her back in. And, if I refuse? Then, you're on your own against whoever is hunting former widows. And, I should mention, the 3 who died were all very good at staying hidden. Sarah closed the tablet and handed it back to him. The weight of her old life was already settling back onto her shoulders like a familiar coat she'd hoped never to wear again. But, the alternative, being hunted by unknown enemies while trying to maintain her civilian cover, was worse. What's the mission? Collins smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Find out who's killing widows before they kill you. And stop them, using whatever methods you deem necessary. The last part was said with particular emphasis. Whatever methods she deemed necessary. That was widow speak for operating outside normal legal constraints, for doing things that couldn't be officially sanctioned or acknowledged. The kind of work that had earned her the designation in the first place. Sarah took one last look at the peaceful clearing, at the normal world she was about to leave behind again. Then, she nodded. Where do we start? The safe house was a nondescript ranch home tucked into the hills outside Billings, the kind of place that real estate agents would describe as having rustic charm and privacy. Sarah knew better. The seemingly random placement of security cameras, the reinforced window frames barely visible beneath fresh paint, and the way the driveway curved to provide multiple escape routes all screamed government black site. Agent Collins had driven them here in silence, taking a route that doubled back on itself 3 times and included 2 vehicle changes at remote locations. Professional paranoia, the kind that had kept her alive during her active years. Sarah found it both comforting and deeply unsettling to slip back into that mindset so easily. Inside, the house looked like a suburban family home, complete with generic landscape paintings and a bowl of plastic fruit on the kitchen counter. But, Sarah noticed the subtle modifications, door frames that would accommodate hidden armor plating, electrical outlets in positions that suggested sophisticated surveillance equipment, and a basement door that was almost certainly reinforced with steel. Home sweet home, Collins said, setting a leather briefcase on the dining room table. We'll be fully operational here within the hour. In the meantime, I need to bring you up to speed on what we know. Sarah examined the living room while he spoke, her trained at cataloging entry points and potential defensive positions. The old instincts were returning faster than she'd expected, muscle memory and mental conditioning reasserting themselves after 8 years of dormancy. The first victim was Elena Vasquez, found dead in her apartment in Phoenix 3 weeks ago, Collins continued, pulling files from his briefcase. Official cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heater. But, Elena was a former Army engineer who'd worked extensively with gas systems. She would have noticed the smell immediately. Sarah accepted the file and flipped through crime scene photos and medical examiner reports. Elena's face was familiar. They'd worked together on an operation in Kazakhstan, something involving stolen nuclear material and a corrupt oil executive. Elena had been meticulous, paranoid about safety protocols, exactly the kind of person who would never ignore a gas leak. Second victim was Marcus Chen in Seattle, Collins continued. Apparent mugging gone wrong, shot 3 times in an alley behind a restaurant. Except Marcus had been carrying a concealed pistol that was never fired, and the surveillance footage from that block mysteriously malfunctioned for exactly 18 minutes. The name hit her harder than she'd expected. Marcus had been her handler for 2 years, the man who'd delivered mission briefings and extracted her from situations that had gone sideways. Professional, careful, and deadly when necessary. Not the kind of person who died in random street crimes. The third was David Park, supposedly died in a hiking accident in Colorado. Fell from a cliff face he'd climbed dozens of times. Search and rescue found his body 3 days later. Collins paused. David's climbing gear had been tampered with. Microscopic cuts in the rope that would have been invisible during normal inspection but would fail under stress. Sarah studied the photos, her mind automatically analyzing the crime scenes with the cold efficiency that had made her valuable to the government. 3 different methods, 3 different locations. Someone with resources and planning capability. But also someone who knows enough about our backgrounds to make the deaths look plausible. Exactly. Which brings us to the current situation. Collins pulled out another file, this one thicker than the others. Yesterday, we intercepted communications indicating that additional targets have been identified. Names, current locations, and operational histories. He slid a photograph across the table. Sarah found herself looking at a surveillance photo of her own bookstore, taken from across the street. The timestamp showed it was from 2 days ago. In the image, she was clearly visible through the front window, helping a customer select a novel from the mystery section. They've been watching me. For at least a week, possibly longer. We only became aware of the surveillance yesterday when one of our automated monitoring systems flagged unusual signal traffic in your area. Someone was conducting extensive background research on your current identity. The violation felt personal in a way that surprised her. Sarah had chosen her location carefully, researching the small Montana town for months before settling there. She'd built relationships slowly, carefully, always maintaining enough distance to protect both herself and the innocent people around her. Now that safety was compromised, and innocent people might be in danger because of her past. What about Mrs. Henderson? My employee at the store? She's being monitored for her safety. If this situation escalates, we'll relocate her temporarily until the threat is neutralized. Sarah nodded, though the casual way Collins discussed disrupting an innocent woman's life reminded her why she'd wanted out of this world in the first place. In the shadow operations business, civilian casualties were called collateral damage and discussed with the same emotional detachment as weather reports. So what do we know about who's behind this? Collins opened the largest file. That's where things get complicated. The operational profiles suggest someone with intimate knowledge of the Widow program, but the program was compartmentalized. Very few people had access to complete operational histories. Sarah studied the list of names and clearance levels. She recognized some of them: senior intelligence officials, military commanders, a few congressional oversight committee members. People who could have accessed the files, but who also had too much to lose by exposing the program. Any of these people would face serious consequences if the Widow program became public knowledge, she observed. Congressional investigations, criminal charges, career destruction. Why risk exposure by going after former operatives? Unless they're trying to eliminate evidence, Collins said quietly. Dead agents can't testify before Congress or write tell-all memoirs. The implications hung in the air between them. Sarah had always known that her government work existed in legal and ethical gray areas, but she'd believed that the oversight systems would protect her. The idea that her own handlers might now consider her a liability was both infuriating and terrifying. There's another possibility, she said slowly. Someone outside the official chain of command who gained access to the files. Industrial espionage, foreign intelligence, maybe even organized crime. The kind of people who might benefit from having former special operations assets eliminated. Collins nodded. We're investigating multiple theories. But, right now, the priority is keeping you alive long enough to help us identify the threat. A soft chime echoed through the house, and Collins immediately reached for his phone. Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her concealed weapon, old reflexes responding to unexpected sounds in hostile territory. Security perimeter, Collins explained after checking his device. Looks like we have company approaching from the main road. Sarah moved to the front window, staying well back from the glass and using the angle of the curtains to observe without being seen. A dark sedan was making its way up the winding driveway, moving at normal speed but with the deliberate pace of people who knew exactly where they were going. Expected? She asked. No. Collins was already moving toward what she assumed was a weapons cache. The only people who know about this location are cleared at the highest levels. Which meant either someone had made a mistake, or someone with those clearances was compromised. Neither possibility was comforting. Sarah watched the sedan approach, counting occupants and noting their behavior. 2 people in front, possibly 1 in back. Professional bearing, no obvious signs of aggressive intent, but that didn't mean much in her experience. The car stopped about 50 yards from the house, close enough to be clearly visible but far enough to provide maneuvering room. Smart positioning. After a moment, the passenger door opened and a woman emerged, hands clearly visible and movements slow and deliberate. She's signaling, Sarah observed. The woman had raised her right hand in a specific gesture, thumb and forefinger forming an O, 3 fingers extended. It was an old recognition signal from her active days. Collins lowered his weapon. Maria Santos. Former widow operative, now working private security. But she's not supposed to know about this location. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Then, how did she find us? The question hung between them as they watched Maria approach the house. If other former widows were being hunted, and if Maria had somehow tracked them to this supposedly secure location, it raised uncomfortable questions about who could be trusted and who might be next on the target list. Maria stopped at the front door and knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more. Another old signal. Collins looked to Sarah, who nodded. They needed information, and right now Maria might be their only source. Collins opened the door but kept his hand near his weapon. Maria. This is unexpected. Hello, Paul. Maria stepped inside, her eyes immediately scanning the room and cataloging details. She was shorter than Sarah remembered, with graying hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of 8 years of civilian stress rather than operational hazards. But her movements still had the fluid efficiency of someone who'd learned to fight for her life. Sarah Martinez, Maria said, extending her hand. Though I suppose we're using different names these days. Maria Santos, Sarah replied, shaking hands and noting the calluses that suggested Maria had stayed in fighting shape. What brings you to our little reunion? Someone tried to kill me yesterday. I figured it was time to compare notes with other survivors. The directness was typically Maria. She'd never been one for subtle approaches or diplomatic language. During their brief overlap in the program, Maria had been known for her ability to extract information from unwilling sources through a combination of intimidation and violence that made interrogators twice her size nervous. Tell us what happened, Collins said. Maria settled into a chair but kept her back to the wall and her eyes on the windows. I was leaving my apartment in San Diego when my car exploded. 30 seconds earlier and I would have been inside. The blast pattern was consistent with a professional-grade improvised device, triggered remotely. Any idea who? I never saw them, but I found surveillance equipment in my apartment afterward. Someone had been watching me for weeks, learning my routines, timing my movements. They knew exactly when I usually left for work. Sarah studied Maria's face, looking for signs of deception or omission. In their line of work, paranoia was both a survival skill and an occupational hazard. But Maria's story matched the pattern they'd already identified, and her knowledge of the recognition signals suggested she was genuine. How did you find this location? Sarah asked. Maria smiled, but it wasn't entirely pleasant. I still have contacts in the intelligence community. When 3 former widows turn up dead in 3 weeks, people start asking questions. It wasn't hard to figure out that someone was activating emergency protocols. Contacts willing to share classified information about safe house locations? Collins's voice carried a warning edge. Contacts who don't want to see former assets eliminated just because someone decided we know too much, Maria replied sharply. And, before you ask, yes, I came alone. But, I can't guarantee I wasn't followed. The admission sent both Sarah and Collins into high alert mode. If Maria had led hostile forces to their location, they were sitting in a potential trap. Sarah moved to check the back windows while Collins monitored the security feeds. Perimeter's clear for now, Collins reported. But, we need to assume this location is compromised. We'll need to relocate. Before we go anywhere, Sarah said, I want to know exactly who your contacts are and what else they've told you. Maria hesitated, which was itself telling. In their former profession, information was currency and trust was a luxury that could get you killed. But circumstances sometimes force temporary alliances between people who might otherwise prefer to remain anonymous. My primary contact is Senator Patricia Hayes, ranking member of the Intelligence Committee. She's been asking questions about unusual activity in black budget programs, specifically related to personnel files being accessed without proper authorization. Sarah recognized the name. Senator Hayes had been one of the few congressional overseers with knowledge of the Widow program's existence, though not its operational details. If she was investigating file access, it suggested that someone was indeed targeting former operatives systematically. What kind of unauthorized access? Complete operational histories, current identities, known associates, psychological profiles. Everything needed to locate and eliminate former assets. The access was sophisticated enough to avoid normal security alerts, but Senator Hayes has been tracking patterns in classified database usage. Collins looked troubled. That level of access would require very high clearances and intimate knowledge of our security protocols. We're looking at either a senior intelligence official or someone who's compromised our systems from the outside. Or both, Sarah added grimly. An inside source providing credentials and access codes to external actors. The possibility hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If someone within the intelligence community was actively working to eliminate former Widow operatives, it meant the threat was both more serious and more dangerous than they'd initially assumed. They couldn't trust normal channels, couldn't rely on established protocols, couldn't even be certain that their current handlers weren't compromised. A soft alarm chimed from Collins's monitoring equipment, and all three of them froze. Multiple vehicles were approaching from different directions, moving in a coordinated pattern that suggested military precision rather than random arrival. Time to go, Collins said, already moving toward what Sarah assumed was an emergency exit. Both of you, move now. Sarah grabbed her gear while Maria checked her weapon. The peaceful afternoon in the Montana hills was about to become something far more dangerous, and Sarah felt the familiar cocktail of adrenaline and calculation that had kept her alive through more situations than she cared to remember. Whatever was happening, whoever was behind the elimination of former Widow operatives, they just escalated the confrontation. Sarah found herself almost grateful. After 8 years of quiet civilian life, part of her had missed the clarity that came with immediate physical danger. The basement of the safe house opened into a tunnel system that Sarah hadn't expected. Collins led them through what appeared to be a natural cave network that had been modified with concrete reinforcements and emergency lighting. The air smelled of damp earth and diesel fuel from backup generators humming somewhere in the darkness. Standard extraction protocol, Collins explained as they moved quickly through the underground passage. Every safe house has multiple exit strategies. This tunnel connects to a garage facility about half a mile from the main house. Above them, Sarah could hear the distant sound of vehicles arriving, doors slamming, and what might have been coordinated tactical movement. Professional but not military, the sounds were too controlled, too quiet for a standard assault team. Private contractors, most likely, the kind who specialized in operations that governments couldn't officially acknowledge. Maria moved behind Sarah with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd made similar escapes before. Despite 8 years of civilian life, all three of them had slipped back into operational mode with disturbing ease. The muscle memory of survival was apparently something you never completely lost. How many? Sarah asked quietly. Collins checked a handheld device that was monitoring the house's security systems. Thermal imaging shows at least 8 individuals, moving in coordinated teams. They're being very careful about containment and avoiding collateral damage to the surrounding area. Professional courtesy, Maria observed grimly. They want us specifically, not random destruction. The tunnel curved sharply to the right and began sloping upward. Emergency lighting strips guided their way toward what Sarah assumed would be their exit point. Behind them, the sounds from the surface had gone quiet, which could mean either that the tactical team had completed their sweep of the empty house, or that they'd discovered the tunnel entrance. Movement behind us, Collins said, checking his device again. They've found our exit route. We need to move faster. The passage opened into a concrete bunker containing 2 vehicles, a military-style Humvee and a civilian pickup truck that had been modified with run-flat tires and what appeared to be armor plating around the engine compartment. Collins handed keys to Sarah. Take the pickup. Maria, you're with me in the Humvee. We'll split up once we reach the main road, different directions, different destinations. Rendezvous in 12 hours at the secondary location. Sarah accepted the keys and a manila envelope that Collins pulled from a wall safe. Current intelligence, contact protocols, and emergency resources. Everything you need to operate independently until we can re-establish secure communications. The sound of footsteps echoing through the tunnel system made further conversation impossible. Collins and Maria climbed into the Humvee while Sarah started the pickup truck. Both vehicles had been positioned for immediate departure, engines already warmed and fuel tanks full. The garage door opened onto a dirt road that wound through dense forest, providing concealment from aerial surveillance and multiple route options for evasive driving. Sarah followed the Humvee for the first mile, then watched it disappear down a side track while she continued toward what her GPS indicated was the main highway. Driving alone through the Montana wilderness, Sarah finally had time to process what had happened. Less than 6 hours ago, she'd been peacefully target shooting, her biggest concern being whether to restock the romance novel section of her bookstore. Now she was fleeing from professional killers while carrying classified intelligence documents and trying to identify threats that might extend to the highest levels of government. The manila envelope on the passenger seat contained everything Collins had promised: detailed intelligence reports, secure communication protocols, and a substantial amount of cash in various currencies. But it also contained something else, a list of remaining widow operatives who might still be alive. Sarah recognized most of the names, though several had been marked as status unknown or presumed deceased. Out of an original program that had included 23 operatives, only 7 were confirmed alive and traceable. The mathematics were sobering: if someone was systematically eliminating former widows, they were more than halfway through their list. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from an encrypted number. Sarah considered ignoring it, but the distinctive ring pattern indicated it was using the secure communication system Collins had activated. "Secure line," she answered. "It's Maria." Collins didn't make it. The words hit Sarah like cold water. She'd worked with Collins for less than a day, but he'd represented official support, government resources, the possibility that this situation could be resolved through established channels. What happened? Ambush about 3 miles from the safe house. Professional execution, probably sniper fire from elevated position. Vehicles destroyed, Collins confirmed dead. Maria's voice carried the flat emotional tone that Sarah recognized from her own operational days, the mental compartmentalization that allowed you to function when people around you were dying. Sarah found herself automatically scanning the tree line on both sides of the road, looking for potential sniper positions and calculating evasive routes. The paranoia was justified now. If they'd eliminated Collins, it meant the threat extended beyond just former widow operatives. They were targeting anyone connected to the investigation. "Are you compromised?" "Unknown. I'm mobile and maintaining security protocols, but they're definitely tracking us somehow. Either through technical surveillance or inside information." "Recommendations?" We stick to the original plan but assume all official channels are compromised. No government facilities, no contact with intelligence community personnel, no electronic communications except emergency protocols." Sarah understood what Maria wasn't saying directly. They were on their own now, cut off from official support and hunted by enemies with sophisticated capabilities and inside knowledge. It was the kind of situation that widow training had prepared them for, but which no amount of preparation could make comfortable. Secondary rendezvous still active? Confirmed. 12 hours from now unless circumstances change. The call ended, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that this situation was more complex than anyone had initially realized. Someone with substantial resources and high-level access was systematically eliminating former widow operatives, and they were sophisticated enough to compromise government safe houses and eliminate federal agents. Sarah's phone buzzed again, this time with a text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Your bookstore, 1 hour. Come alone. A friend." The message could be a trap, but it could also be their only lead. Sarah made a decision that her training warned her against, but her instincts supported. She turned the pickup truck around and headed back toward town. The drive took 45 minutes through increasingly familiar terrain. Sarah found herself noting details she'd never paid attention to during her civilian life: sightlines, potential ambush points, escape routes through country roads she'd driven hundreds of times for innocent reasons. The mental shift from civilian to operative was complete now, and she wasn't sure she'd ever be able to reverse it. Her bookstore sat on Main Street between a hardware store and a small cafe, exactly the kind of normal, peaceful location she'd chosen deliberately. Now it looked like potential hostile territory. Sarah parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, using her knowledge of the local area to observe the building from multiple angles before committing to direct contact. The front of the store appeared normal, lights on, open sign displayed, no obvious surveillance or threat indicators. But Sarah noticed that the cafe next door was closed despite normally staying open until evening, and there were fewer cars parked on the street than usual for a Tuesday afternoon. She entered through the rear door, using her key and moving quietly through the storage room toward the main retail area. Voices from the front of the store made her pause. Mrs. Henderson was talking with someone, and the conversation seemed relaxed rather than coerced. Sarah listened for a moment, then stepped into the main store area with her hand positioned near her concealed weapon. Mrs. Henderson was behind the counter helping a customer select a biography, and everything appeared completely normal except for the man sitting in the reading corner with a newspaper. He was probably in his 60s, well-dressed but not ostentatiously so, with the kind of calm demeanor that suggested either complete innocence or complete professional control. When he saw Sarah, he folded his newspaper and approached with a slight smile. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for coming. I hope you don't mind, but I've been enjoying the atmosphere of your store. Mrs. Henderson has been very helpful in recommending some excellent novels." Sarah recognized the type even though she didn't recognize the individual. Intelligence community, senior level, probably retired but maintaining connections and clearances. The kind of person who knew things but couldn't say them directly. "I'm afraid we're closing early today," she said, hoping Mrs. Henderson would take the hint. "Oh, that's unusual," Mrs. Henderson said. "But I can handle the closing procedures if you need to speak with this gentleman privately. He mentioned he was an old friend of yours." The offer was innocent enough, but Sarah couldn't risk involving Mrs. Henderson in whatever was happening. "Actually, why don't you head home early? I'll take care of closing up." After Mrs. Henderson left, Sarah locked the front door and turned the sign to closed. The man waited patiently, still holding his newspaper and maintaining the relaxed posture of someone who wasn't concerned about immediate threats. "Who are you?" Sarah asked directly. "My name is Robert Crane. I was Deputy Director of Operations at CIA until my retirement 3 years ago. I was also one of the original architects of the Widow program." The admission was both revealing and dangerous. If Crane was telling the truth, he had intimate knowledge of every aspect of the program, including operational details that could help explain the current situation. If he was lying, he was someone with enough inside knowledge to be extremely dangerous. "Prove it." Crane pulled out a wallet and removed what appeared to be a standard business card. But, when Sarah examined it closely, she could see the microprinting and embedded security features that marked it as a genuine CIA identification card, the one marked with retirement status. "I've been tracking the elimination of former widow operatives for the past month," Crane said. "Initially through unofficial channels, but when Agent Collins was killed this afternoon, I realized the situation had escalated beyond normal investigative protocols." "You know about Collins?" "I know that he was eliminated along with his vehicle approximately 90 minutes ago, and that you and Maria Santos escaped through a tunnel system that officially doesn't exist. I also know that the tactical team responsible is now searching for both of you using resources that suggest substantial financial backing and sophisticated intelligence capabilities." Sarah studied Crane's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. His knowledge was certainly consistent with someone who had high-level access to current intelligence, but it could also indicate that he was connected to the people behind the killings. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm the only person who knows why former widow operatives are being eliminated, and I'm probably the only person who can help you stop it." Crane folded his newspaper and set it on a nearby shelf. The program was terminated officially, but certain elements continued operating without authorization. "Someone has been using widow protocols and resources for private operations, and now they're eliminating evidence." "What kind of private operations?" "The kind that involve significant financial interests and political connections that extend beyond normal government oversight. Corporate espionage, foreign influence operations, elimination of inconvenient witnesses to activities that powerful people would prefer to keep buried." The implications were staggering. If Crane was telling the truth, the widow program had been corrupted into a private intelligence service for wealthy and connected individuals, operating completely outside legal authority and using taxpayer-funded resources for personal gain. "Who's running it?" "That's what we need to find out. But I have a starting point." Crane pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a series of financial documents. Unusual money transfers, payments to shell companies, resources being diverted from official intelligence budgets to unauthorized operations. Someone with very high-level access has been funding private operations for at least 2 years. Sarah studied the documents, her mind automatically analyzing patterns and connections. The amounts were substantial, millions of dollars flowing through complex networks of companies and bank accounts. The kind of money that could fund sophisticated operations and by the services of professional contractors. This could be anyone with access to black budget funds. CIA, NSA, Defense Intelligence, even some Congressional Oversight Committee members. Exactly. Which is why we can't trust normal channels or official protocols. Whoever is behind this has the resources to compromise any investigation that goes through established systems. A sound from the back of the store made both of them freeze. Sarah moved toward the storage room while Crane remained near the front door, both of them automatically taking defensive positions despite the civilian setting. Sarah found Mrs. Henderson standing near the rear entrance, looking confused and slightly frightened. "I'm sorry, dear, but I forgot my purse. I came back to get it and I heard voices." "Is everything all right?" The innocent question highlighted the impossible situation Sarah found herself in. She'd spent 8 years building a quiet life in this town, developing relationships with good people like Mrs. Henderson, creating the kind of normal existence that had helped her heal from the psychological damage of her operational years. Now that life was collapsing around her, and innocent people were potentially in danger because of her past. "Everything's fine," Sarah said gently. "Just some business matters to discuss. Why don't you take tomorrow off? I'll call you when I know more about our schedule." After Mrs. Henderson left with her purse and a slightly worried expression, Sarah returned to the main store area where Crane was examining the shelves of books with apparent interest. "Nice life you've built here," he observed. "I can understand why you wouldn't want to give it up. But I'm going to have to, aren't I?" Crane nodded soberly. "The people behind this aren't going to stop until all potential witnesses are eliminated. Your only chance is to identify and neutralize the threat before they get to you. And you're offering to help out of the goodness of your heart?" I'm offering to help because I helped create this program, and I feel responsible for what it's become. Also because if this becomes public knowledge, it will destroy what's left of congressional trust in the intelligence community. There are larger issues at stake than just our individual survival. Sarah understood the calculation. Crane wasn't motivated by altruism or personal concern for former operatives. He was trying to protect the institutional integrity of the intelligence community and his own legacy. But his motivations didn't necessarily make him untrustworthy, and right now she needed allies more than she needed pure motives. What do you propose? Maria Santos has agreed to meet with us tonight. Between the three of us, we have enough operational experience and inside knowledge to conduct an investigation that stays ahead of official channels. We identify who's behind the rogue operations, gather evidence, and neutralize the threat. Neutralize how? Crane's expression became carefully neutral. Using whatever methods prove necessary. This isn't a situation that can be resolved through normal legal processes. Sarah understood the euphemism. They were talking about operating outside legal authority, using the same methods that had made the Widow program both effective and controversial. Assassination, sabotage, intimidation, whatever it took to stop people who were themselves operating outside legal constraints. It was exactly the kind of work she'd hoped to leave behind forever. The abandoned mining facility outside Butte looked like the perfect location for a clandestine meeting, isolated, multiple escape routes, and far enough from civilization to conduct conversations without electronic surveillance. Sarah arrived first, using the extra time to establish security perimeters and identify potential threats in the surrounding terrain. The main building had been gutted years ago, leaving only concrete shells and rusted equipment that provided excellent concealment for anyone wanting to observe approaches from multiple directions. Sarah positioned herself where she could watch the access road while remaining hidden from potential snipers in the surrounding hills. Maria arrived exactly on time, driving a different vehicle than she'd used during their escape from the safe house. She approached with the careful precision of someone who'd spent the day evading surveillance while gathering intelligence through unofficial channels. Any contact from hostiles? Sarah asked as Maria joined her in the concealment of the abandoned building. Nothing direct, but I detected surveillance earlier. Professional teams, probably the same contractors who hit the safe house. They're being careful to maintain distance, but they're definitely tracking us somehow. Electronic surveillance? That's what I thought initially, but I've been cycling through phones and vehicles all day. Either they have technology we don't know about, or they have inside information about our movements. The second possibility was more troubling. If their enemies had real-time intelligence about their activities, it suggested either sophisticated technical capabilities or human sources with access to their plans. Robert Crane arrived 20 minutes late, approaching in a government sedan that immediately drew Sarah's attention. The vehicle was clean, recent model, and bore the subtle characteristics of an official carpool vehicle. Interesting choice of transportation, Sarah observed as Crane joined them. I've decided that hiding our activities is less important than maintaining legitimate cover, Crane replied. If we're going to investigate this situation effectively, we need access to official resources and databases. That means operating with at least partial government sanction. Maria looked skeptical. I thought we agreed that official channels were compromised. Some official channels are compromised, Crane corrected. But not all of them. I've spent the afternoon reaching out to contacts who weren't involved in the original Widow program but who have access to current intelligence systems. We have allies, but we need to be very careful about who we trust. Crane opened a briefcase and spread documents across a makeshift table created from stacked concrete blocks. I've identified patterns in the financial transfers that point to specific individuals. The money trail leads to a private intelligence firm called Blackwater Strategic Solutions, which has contracts with multiple government agencies and several major corporations. Sarah recognized the name. Blackwater Strategic was one of many private military contractors that had emerged in the post-9/11 era, providing services that government agencies couldn't or wouldn't perform directly. They specialized in sensitive operations that required plausible deniability and freedom from normal oversight constraints. What's their connection to the Widow program? Several former government officials who had knowledge of the program now work for Blackwater Strategic in senior positions. They have access to classified databases, knowledge of operational protocols, and the financial resources to fund elimination operations. Maria studied the organizational chart that Crane had prepared. So they're using government resources and former widow protocols to eliminate potential witnesses to their private operations. Exactly. They've essentially privatized a classified government program for their own purposes, and now they're cleaning up evidence by eliminating anyone who could expose what they've done. The scope of the conspiracy was larger than Sarah had initially imagined. They weren't just dealing with rogue individuals or isolated criminal activity. They were confronting an entire organization that had corrupted government resources for private gain and was now using lethal force to protect their operations. Who else knows about this? Sarah asked. Senator Hayes has been investigating financial irregularities in intelligence budgets, but she doesn't have the operational details that would allow her to take direct action. A few other congressional oversight members have raised questions, but they're being stonewalled by claims of national security. What about law enforcement? FBI, Justice Department? Crane's expression darkened. That's where things get complicated. Blackwater Strategic has cultivated relationships with senior officials in multiple agencies. They've provided services that these officials found valuable, and they have information that could embarrass or compromise people in very high positions. Blackmail, Maria said bluntly. Mutually beneficial relationships that have created conflicts of interest throughout the government oversight system. Anyone who tries to investigate Blackwater Strategic finds their own agencies reluctant to pursue the matter aggressively. Sarah understood the implications. They were dealing with systemic corruption that extended far beyond the elimination of former widow operatives. Blackwater Strategic had essentially captured portions of the government oversight system, making normal legal processes inadequate for addressing their activities. So what do we do about it? We gather evidence that's so compelling and so damaging that it forces action despite the institutional resistance, Crane said. And we do it before they complete their elimination campaign. He pulled out another set of documents, these marked with the distinctive formatting of government intelligence reports. I've identified the current operational commander of Blackwater Strategic's elimination program. His name is Colonel Marcus Webb, former Army Special Operations, recruited by Blackwater 2 years ago specifically to handle sensitive operations. Sarah studied Webb's photograph and operational history. Military experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, multiple classified commendations, expertise in unconventional warfare and targeted elimination operations. Exactly the kind of professional who would be capable of systematically hunting former intelligence assets. Where is he now? Denver, coordinating operations from a private facility that Blackwater Strategic uses for training and operational planning. The facility is officially a corporate headquarters, but intelligence sources indicate it's being used as a command center for elimination operations. Maria looked thoughtful. If we could gain access to that facility, we might be able to gather evidence about their operations and identify other targets. It's heavily secured, Crane warned. Private security, sophisticated surveillance systems, and probably active operational personnel on site. Any direct approach would be extremely dangerous. Sarah was already thinking through the tactical challenges. A direct assault would be impossible with just 3 people, but there might be other approaches. What about Webb personally? Does he have vulnerabilities we could exploit? Crane consulted his notes. He maintains a residence in Denver, follows regular schedules for operational planning meetings, and has a small circle of trusted associates. But he's also extremely paranoid and well-trained in counter-surveillance techniques. Personal life? Family, relationships, recreational activities? Divorced, no children, few social connections outside of professional relationships. His only regular non-work activity appears to be a weekly poker game with other former military officers. Sarah felt a familiar chill of operational focus settling over her thoughts. They were talking about targeting a specific individual for elimination or capture, using his personal habits and relationships to create opportunities for contact. It was exactly the kind of work that had defined her years as a widow operative. Are we talking about killing him? Crane met her gaze directly. We're talking about stopping him from killing us and the other remaining widow operatives. If that requires lethal force, then yes. And if we're wrong? If he's just following orders and eliminating him doesn't stop the program? Then, we move up the chain of command until we reach someone with the authority to call off the elimination campaign. But, right now, Webb is our best lead and our most immediate threat. Maria had been studying the facility layouts while they talked. There might be another approach. Instead of going after Webb directly, we could target the operational intelligence that Blackwater Strategic is using to track former widows. If we could compromise their database systems or eliminate their files on remaining operatives, it would effectively end their elimination campaign. Cyber warfare instead of direct action, Sarah mused. Do we have the technical capabilities for that kind of operation? I have contacts in the intelligence community who specialize in electronic surveillance and database manipulation, Crane said. But accessing Blackwater's systems would require either inside cooperation or physical access to their secure facilities. Sarah realized that they were planning exactly the kind of complex operation that had made the Widow program both effective and notorious. Multiple approaches, contingency planning, the willingness to use whatever methods proved necessary to accomplish their objectives. How long do we have? Intelligence sources indicate that Blackwater Strategic is accelerating their timeline, Crane replied. They want to complete the elimination of remaining widow operatives within the next week, possibly because they're concerned about congressional investigation or media exposure. A week to identify, locate, and neutralize multiple professional killers who have government resources and inside knowledge of our capabilities, Maria summarized. While avoiding elimination ourselves and gathering evidence that can't be suppressed by people in positions of authority. When you put it that way, it sounds almost impossible, Sarah said. Almost impossible is exactly the kind of mission that widow operatives were trained to handle, Crane replied. You have skills and experience that make you uniquely qualified to operate in this environment. Sarah looked around the abandoned mining facility, at the rusted equipment and empty concrete shells that surrounded them. 8 years ago, she'd walked away from this life because she'd wanted something normal, something peaceful, something that didn't require her to kill people or make decisions that would haunt her for years afterward. Now she was back in exactly the same situation, planning operations that would almost certainly involve violence and deception, targeting people who might be just following orders or protecting their own survival. The moral complexity was familiar and exhausting. But the alternative was allowing Blackwater Strategic to complete their elimination campaign, which would mean the deaths of good people who'd served their country and deserved better than being murdered to protect private criminal operations. What's the operational timeline? She asked. Crane spread out a calendar and operational planning documents. Webb's next coordination meeting is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at the Denver facility. If we're going to move against him, that would be our best opportunity. The facility will have minimal security during business hours, and we can plan our approach to coincide with his scheduled arrival. 3 people against a fortified facility defended by professional contractors, Maria observed. I've had worse odds, but not recently. Sarah found herself calculating approaches, escape routes, equipment requirements, and contingency plans. The mental shift back into operational mode was happening automatically, as if 8 years of civilian life had been nothing more than an extended vacation between missions. We'll need weapons, surveillance equipment, communications gear, and probably some kind of cover identities for approaching the facility, she said. I can provide all of that through official channels that aren't compromised by Blackwater's influence, Crane said. The operation will have to be conducted completely outside normal authority, but we'll have the resources necessary to succeed. And if we're captured or killed? Then, the elimination campaign continues until all remaining widow operatives are dead, and the people responsible for corrupting a classified government program face no consequences for their actions. Sarah looked at Maria, who nodded slowly. They were both thinking the same thing. They'd trained for exactly this kind of situation, but they'd hoped never to face it again. The skills were still there, the willingness to take extreme action when necessary, the ability to function effectively in life-threatening situations. All right, Sarah said finally. Let's go hunting. The next 18 hours would determine whether they could stop Blackwater Strategic's elimination campaign or whether they would become its final victims. Sarah felt the familiar combination of fear and exhilaration that had defined her operational years, the knowledge that she was about to step completely outside normal legal and moral boundaries in pursuit of objectives that couldn't be achieved through conventional methods. Her quiet life as a bookstore owner in small-town Montana was officially over. Sarah Martinez was disappearing back into the shadow world, and Widow Mark 27 was being reactivated for what she hoped would be her final mission.